Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Captain Billy's Garage. Today, more Prius. Yep, she got a few issues. So we're back in the shop with her today, and we're going to do a PCV valve. How exciting is that? In today's episode, we are going to be replacing this PCV valve. These are known to fail in these motors. When they do, they start consuming oil. The job of the PCV valve is to vent excess crankcase pressure back into the intake manifold and prevent it from just escaping to the atmosphere. This helps reduce the emissions of the vehicle. Hooray, we love the atmosphere. And to help future-proof this, bam, we're going to put an air oil separator into this thing. It is going to go in line between the PCV valve and the engine, or excuse me, and the intake manifold. This is going to prevent it from sucking the oil into the motor and hopefully extend the service life of our engine. This is going to capture that oil and make sure that it doesn't get into the motor. More on that later. So let's dive in. Let's get this thing torn apart and get our PCV valve replaced, and then we'll go through and show you how to do the air oil separator installation. So this job isn't too bad. Getting the airbox out of there is just some hand tools. Get this resonator cold air snorkel out of the way, a couple of the hoses out of the way. We got to get this wiring harness out of the way so we can get the intake manifold out. Just a few clips and some connections. We'll get this out of the way. Your throttle body, one of those hoses is coolant. Leave it there. Don't touch it. You're going to end up with coolant everywhere. So we're going to pull the bolts out that hold the throttle body on and get a look inside here. Ooh, dang. I don't know. That doesn't look real great. You see that shine? See that gloss on the back side of the throttle body and down in the intake manifold? That's engine oil. That is a failed PCV valve. This is what we're trying to capture with that oil catch can rather than letting it get into the motor. And there's a lot there. I put this PCV valve in about 50,000 miles ago, and you could just see like there's a puddle of oil down in this motor. So that's no good. So we're going to give it some love and get that out of there and hopefully prevent it from ever being a problem again. Clean a few things up. I'm going to get a ragged stuff down into the intake manifold to start soaking up that oil while we finish pulling the bolts out and hopefully not make a big mess when we pull this out. But alas, ask me how I know. All right, just a few more bolts. We'll have the intake manifold out of the car. Start looking at it. All right, so looking down into it, you can see some oil residue in there. We are going to give this a clean. It's in another video. And that stainless line there, that's the EGR system. Also, that was clogged. Another thing I had to fix. But here it is, our PCV valve and the hose that runs over to the intake manifold. Not too bad once you get the intake off, and even that's not a horrible job. But this PCV valve, gotta go. Time for a new one. So to get it out, you do have to give this a fair bit. They do come from the factory with a thread sealant on them. They do bite in there quite hard. I ended up having to get a longer handle wrench out of it to actually get the threads to break loose. So just keep that in mind. It might take a little bit. So there it is. There's the old one, new one. These are kind of like a two-way check valve. They vacuum in one direction, but then also pressure in it. So if there's too much crankcase, it'll push it into the intake. But otherwise it seals against vacuum and prevents it from getting out there. So they should rattle when you give it a go. If you don't hear it rattling, might be something wrong with it. Getting the new one in, it's already got the thread sealant in it, so we'll just crank it down in there. Now we got to find a home for our air oil separator. From what I found online, this is the best spot to do it. So now we just got to find a way that the hose fittings point in a direction that we think we can route them through, as well as give ourselves options for mounting a bracket. So I'm just using the bracket stuff that came in the kit. This is just a really cheap Amazon kit that I got. All right, I've identified where I want to put it. There's a hole right there just above the headlight that I'm going to put a rib nut in. This is going to provide our mounting hole for our bracket that's going to hold the air oil separator. So squeeze that down in there. This hole's a little big, but it worked just fine. All right, now to get our bracket lined up, we're going to need to rebend it. So this is what I came up with. Rebend it to match the angle of the front of the car and the air oil separator. I drilled and tapped it. to put this 1/4 bolt in it to hold it in place. Locked all that together, re-drilled the hole on the end here so it would line up with the riv nut. So let's get it in there. Nice and easy. So the next thing we want to check, it does stick up a little high. We want to make sure that it's not going to hit the hood. So we're going to bring the hood down nice and slow and then push it shut. Make sure we don't see it dimpling. Obviously, there's a few dents in this hood. I wasn't too concerned, but not everyone wants dents in their hood. It fit great, no issues there. So let's start routing our, let's get our fittings installed. These fittings are not tapered seat. They are a straight thread. So they're going to require some kind of a compression seal or O-ring in this case to seal them against the front face of that air oil separator. The O-rings I'm using are these green ones. These are for AC systems. I really have great luck with these. They're very chemical resistant. They hold up really well. They're just a nice tough rubber. So we're going to put those on each one and make sure that we've got a good seal on the face of our air oil separator. Before seating these in there, we do want to give them a little bit of lubricant. This is going to prevent the O-rings from galling and grabbing on that surface. So just a little light sprit, and we'll get those threaded in there. One thing to keep in mind when you thread these in, when you're tightening them down, don't overdo it. These O-rings are soft. If you go and crank down on it too much, you're just going to squish it out and it's going to split. You're going to have a vacuum leak. Don't want a vacuum leak. Again, the job of this is to seal in line with the system and capture oil, not let excess air in. Make your rotor run awful. All right, we got those in there. For hose, I'm just using this vinyl PVC fiber reinforced hose. You can get it at Home Depot. I just happen to have some of it, so this is what I decided to try. I've seen a few people online use it with decent success, so this is what I chose to go with. It's easy enough. So we're just going to cut the end off on it square, make sure everything fits, and then we're going to fish it through. You do want to pay attention to how you're fishing this through. It will, if it rubs and chafes on something, you will chafe a hole through it. You will end up with a vacuum leak and your car's not going to run right. So spend a few extra minutes to make sure the hose fits right and that the routing on it isn't rubbing against anything harsh or sharp. All right, I'm happy with that. Put our hose clamp on, get ready to put our intake back on. Prepping for our intake. Going to wipe up all the oil that we found on the throttle body, make sure the surfaces are clean. Going to get the vacuum out here. I'm going to go through and suck out all of the intake ports, make sure that no debris, dirt or anything like that got in there while we were working. And we're going to put our gasket back in our intake, again, making sure everything's nice and clean. Went ahead and put a little bit of lubricant on the surface of that gasket to make sure it seals and is smooth against the engine. Put all our bolts back in. I torqued all these down to 100 inch-pounds. And this is just a plastic intake threading in with a nice soft rubber gasket. So it doesn't need a whole lot. All right, doing the same thing on our throttle body surface. Got that installed. Put our air temp sensor back in the intake manifold. We had to clean that. It was literally sitting in oil. All right. Getting our last few fittings, hooking up the EGR system. Back to the intake, there we go. All right, now we can get our hose run from our intake over to our air oil separator. So the hose end on the air oil separator side is fine. It just goes right in. But to the intake manifold, there's a big step in it. So we need to adapt it. What I did is I took the old air oil line, or the old PCV line, and cut the big end off of it. You can see it there sitting in the bottom of the screen. To adapt it, I got this 3/8 hose barb fitting and just stuffed and wiggled it in there. See? Now I've got this adapter that goes from our hose size up to the intake size, and it's an exact fit. So I'll put some hose clamps on that, and we'll get it stuck into the end of the hose. Hook that up to the intake manifold, put the other hose clamp on it. Then we're going to pop the other end loose, make sure our hose length is right, just trim it up a bit. Again, chafing is a big problem. I'm happy with all that now. So let's go through, hook up all our connections again. Just got a few on the back side of the intake. We've got some on the left side of the intake for our water pump, our AC compressor. Get the last couple of brackets put back on so we can put all the clips that hold our wiring harness up in place. And in this case, you notice that the wiper tray was out. You don't have to do this for that job. If you do, remove the wiper motor first from the tray. I just broke the windshield right then, so just something to be advised of. But we're getting all this button back up. You can see the intakes back on now with the air filter and everything. It looks great. See the air oil catch can on the right there. Super excited. Hopefully this works really well. And there it is, all back together. Alrighty, we've put about 500 miles on it since we put the catch can on. You can see the hoses aren't clear anymore. So this is the in. You can see it's a little bit darker than the out. So it's definitely catching something. So that's what we're trying to keep out of the intake. I'm going to pull the dipstick on it here. See what we got in it. Oh yeah, so we got some fluid in there. And you can see it's kind of a milky, mostly watery looking color. And a lot of that is just the humidity that's escaping the crankcase. Like part of the combustion process is, one of the outputs is water. So we're still getting some of that, still getting some blow by. So we're going to pull this out, dump that out of it. Oh wow. Okay. So this is what we're catching. And there's a lot in there. Kind of impressed. So it's working. Given how milky it, or how like very light oil colored it is, I'm gonna say most of that's water. If you let that sit for a while, it probably will separate out. So I'm gonna pour this into, see if I can find a clear plastic cup. We can see what this looks like. Yeah, so you can see there's some sludge on the bottom. We'll wipe that up. So, a lot of froth. I did just shut the car down. So I'm gonna leave this sitting on the bench overnight and check it out in the morning. But it's working. It's doing what it was supposed to. And that's awesome. Hopefully we've extended the life of this motor some. And here it is after it's sat for a day. You can see most of that on the bottom now is water, and just that top film is oil, but it's still catching a lot. Thanks again for following along. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you all next time.